Firouzja bites the bullet. Or maybe the bullet bug bites him. The craziness in this round started at 12:45 a.m. when Alireza Firouzja decides to do some preparation for this game. He logs onto Lichess at 12:45 a.m. He proceeds to play bullet chess, 30-second long games for the next 5 hours. 12:45 a.m. to 5:45 a.m. During this time, he plays a 3.5-hour match, 250 games long against Daniel Naroditsky. Firouzja must be trying to let off some steam, although maybe that didn't go his way as he lost the match 108 to 142. Is this the preparation that Firouzja needs to get back on track and take down the leader? I'm Kulajic. Let's see. Nepo sticks with his Petrov defense that has been working so very well for him. Firouzja goes for a bit of a sideline in the Petrov with the move c4. He is trying to play for a big space advantage as he forces all of Nepo's knights to move away. Bishop g4 by Nepo already gets Firouzja to make a concession with the move f3, kicking the bishop away. Bishop returns. Then c6, starting to get at the center. And then after queen b6, lining it up with Firouzja's king, so he steps away. Rook c8. Here, Firouzja's bullet preparation blossoms into fruition with the terrible move, g4. You can understand where Firouzja is coming from with this move. He's having trouble coming up with a clear plan, and he's hoping to play against Black's knights on f6 and e5, trying to make it so they don't have anywhere to move to. The problem, though, is that as Firouzja continues to push his kingside pawns all willy-nilly, he's going to end up doing more harm than good, as suddenly it's Black who's going to be the one taking over the attack. Knight g3 is the threat. Now the other knight retreats back. After f4, what would you do? It's time to sacrifice the piece. We don't have much of a choice anyway with our knight hanging there and with nowhere to go. It goes forward. It takes this pawn. The bishop moves away, which allows us to go queen takes b2. Firouzja is in deep trouble here. The knight on c3 is hanging. The bishop on e2 is potentially hanging due to these tactics along the second rank. After knight e4, another chance. This is just blow after blow. What comes next? Rook c4 is a very nice move, taking advantage of the pin on the e2 bishop. It cannot capture this rook. Meanwhile, we have pointed our rook at all of white's minor pieces on the fourth rank, and something is going to be left loose. After bishop e3, coming back to defend, another tactic. What would you play? Bishop takes g5, opening everything up. Now we're opening up the e8 rook. The rook's going to be taking something. Knight takes allows rook takes bishop, and this is exactly what we can see with black just having so many threats. The knight's coming to h4. The bishop might make it to h3. We're threatening to take on d4. We might be threatening to take on e2. It's just every single thing in white's position is just falling apart. Instead of that, if you tried to take with the bishop, you're facing pretty much all of the same problems with the knight on d4 hanging, and if you move that knight, you'll lose your bishop on e2. Instead of that, Firouzja starts by attacking the queen. Queen grabs the pawn. Then what would you do here? Nepo delivers the killing blow with the move rook takes d4. If you play bishop takes rook, then comes queen takes d5. Looking at white's king, we're attacking the knight on e4, we're attacking the bishop on d4, and just notice how every single one of black's pieces is participating in this attack. This is how you know that there's no way white's going to survive this attack. White could also try taking with the queen, but then comes queen takes e2, winning another piece, and again, with all of black's pieces in the attack, no way white lives for much longer. Instead of that, Firouzja tries to bail into this endgame after rook takes a2, but this endgame is winning for black. We'll see black has a bishop and 3 pawns for rook, so black has a material advantage, and we're going to see that even in the endgame, white's king is still going to come under heavy fire. Black attacks this knight, the knight attacks the bishop moves, then the rook comes into the attack, now the bishop, and the bishop comes back, comes to e4. Firouzja resigned here because after bishop g2, there is immediately checkmate with rook h3, both of these bishops preventing white from making any moves. If you move your king up, then bishop takes d5, it does create a fork against white's rook and knight. There's no way to defend both of them. This game, certainly not Firouzja's best showing, and that might have had something to do with playing Bullet for 5 hours until 5:45 a.m. right before this game. Nakamura against Rapport. Rapport brings out the Sveshnikov, something that he has not yet used in this tournament. He catches Hikaru by surprise, and Nakamura doesn't really have anything too impressive for it. We go for this position, but then Nakamura chooses a bit of a less popular setup with the move G3. He goes for this fianchetto, and the main thing is white has this D5 square to use for their knight. However, we're going to see that Rapport has just enough resources to counteract this square, leaving the game pretty much even. After A5, now Rapport is trying to gain some counterplay on the queen side. Castle, knight E7, knight comes to E3. Already we can see Rapport has pretty much all of his pieces fighting against Hikaru's for these central squares. Hikaru decides to trade knights. Nakamura puts his knight on F5 because if you play knight D5, then after queen B7, Rapport is ready to eliminate this knight. Instead, after knight F5, queen goes back to D8. Nakamura gets this pawn, but after G6, if you move the knight away, you lose your queen, so you have to trade queens first. And then if you move your knight back to E3, then black would play trade, bring the rook to D2, where black would be taking over the position with such a strong rook. So instead, Nakamura plays H4, bishop F6. Then the rook still comes into D2, which gives Rapport plenty of counterplay. White's up a pawn, but this rook gives black just enough. Once the rooks are traded, now black picks up this extra pawn. There are a few more moves. We're going to get a pretty even position where they played on for a while here, but Rapport was never really in any danger once he collects this pawn. Even though he is down a pawn, this is a pretty holdable position because once you trade it off so that white only has one pawn left, all you have to do if you're black is sacrifice your bishop for the last pawn. Radjabov plays the double fianchetto setup, but Duda is able to neutralize it quite easily. And once we get into the middle game, we're going to see a lot of trades. The position opens up. Again, we're going to see a whole series of exchanges starting right around here after this move knight e5. The bishops trade, knights trade, queens trade, knight trades with this little tactic, forcing this endgame. We're already on move 20, but this endgame was no big deal for Duda to defend. Fabi against Ding. This is a big matchup. These are two players who, first of all, are a couple of the players with an outside chance of overtaking Nepo for first place, and second of all, are the two players fighting for a chance at second place. Another thing to keep in mind is going into this round, there is a big momentum against Fabi, who has not done well the past few rounds, and in favor of Ding, who is coming off of 2 wins. We have a Roy Lopez opening this game, where Ding is hoping to get a Marshall with the move d5. If white plays c3, we'll see the famous Marshall gambit, where black gives up a pawn but has ton of activity as compensation. So Fabi avoids it with the move a4, creating a threat against the b pawn, which is defended. Then we're going to see both sides slowly bring out their pieces. A lot of maneuvering. We have another type of typical position. Black gets a lot of space here, but they have conceded some squares like the d5 square. Knight g3, Fabi brings his pieces over for a big kingside attack, and we're going to see Fabi go for it over on this side of the board. After g6, Fabi plays bishop h6, you've weakened the h6 square, so the bishop comes in, then the knight comes in. You definitely cannot take this knight because when the knight takes back, the queen is going to come in and deliver a checkmate very soon. Instead of that, the bishop moves back to d8, then Fabi plays knight g7. This, by the way, has been the second knight fianchettoed in the enemy camp. The problem with the knight on g7 is that, well, you would much rather have a queen there. But the knight at least still does maintain some threats. It's attacking the rook right now. The rook f8, h3. This move b3 played by Ding, trying to shut out Fabi's bishop. For instance, if you take with the pawn, then the knight comes back to c6. It can jump to d4 or b4, leaving white's bishop totally stuck behind its own pawn. Instead, Fabi takes with the bishop, so they trade. And after bishop c6, rook c1, h8, Fabi finally decides to make some progress here with the move knight e6, unleashing an attack against the rook, so he takes it. But what tactic does black have here to regain their material? Ding plays bishop a5, attacking the rook, and discovered attack on the bishop on f8. So material is now back to even. The knight comes back, bishop b7, defending the pawn, so then the queen comes back. It's a lot of back and forth here, but over the next few moves, Ding starts to be outplayed. He plays this move f6. He's trying to keep everything solid. And after f4, Ding should play bishop c6, attack the a4 pawn, and kind of just sit on his position. But instead he plays pawn takes f4, opening things up, allowing white to take here. After g5, we see a couple things going wrong for Ding. His light squares in the center are potentially very weak, and if Fabi is able to open up the position with a move like d4, then Ding could be in big trouble. The knights quickly get traded off here. Again, Ding is left with the potentially weaker king and the weaker pawns on f6. After a few more maneuvering moves for a while, both sides just slowly trying to improve their position. We have now made the time control, so both sides have another hour to think about everything that's going on here. So there wasn't any serious time pressure in this game. Now h4, Fabi trying to open up Ding's king. b4 opening up on the other side of the board, but right here is where Fabi misses his best chance. His best plan would have been to try to bring the queen further into Ding's position with a maneuver such as queen f3 to h5. The big problem though is after this move, where he played pawn takes g5. This was an example of why you shouldn't release the tension, because black is actually going to be the one who will be able to take advantage of the now open h-file. Suddenly Ding will start to take over this position. It still looks scary though, with the queen coming in. The king moves back. Any kind of queen checks can be blocked by black's own queen on the defense, so it's hard for Fabi to make something work. d4, still trying to open things up, but after bishop d3, again, we're going to start to see that black is the one taking over here. Fabi's still trying. He pushes this pawn forward. After a few checks, the pawn's moving forward. We can see that this is very typical of opposite colored bishop positions. Because Ding has full control over the light squares, Fabi's pawn is stuck. It's not ever going to be able to promote. And actually, just a couple moves later, this is where Fabi made a big mistake. Instead of this move bishop e3, he should have just played queen e3, go into this drawn endgame. But instead, bishop e3, then Ding gets his queen to g3. Suddenly, it's Fabi's king who's the one under pressure. Ding brings the rook to h8. This is what I was saying before. Ding is the one using the h-file. Fabi has to make a queen just to try to distract some of Ding's pieces away. But this is a very difficult position to defend. Even once Fabi gets a queen trade after a couple of moves, it's still going to be a difficult endgame to hold. Opposite colored bishop endgames are generally drawish, yes. But once you add the rooks on the board, black has a lot more winning chances thanks to their extra pawn on f6. Fabi was not able to defend this. Right here, what would you do for black? We're in an endgame. Let's use our king. King h5 to g4. Very nice plan by Ding. His king is so much more active than Fabi's. This is going to give him extra good winning chances. Eventually, once the rook makes it into Fabi's position, is going to be game over. Bishop c7 allows rook coming to e7. The rook will come into e2. This position is just about over. Once the bishop comes to d3, Ding's king is so much better than Fabi's king. That's what's going to allow him to win this position. The king will move up, threaten all sorts of checkmates on the back rank. We also have the f-pawn still to push. If we win this g-pawn, which looks like it could be happening very soon, then we'll have two pawns over here. Fabi resigned. Jan Nepomniachtchi with a huge lead over the field with 8 points out of 11. Ding at 6.5. Everyone else separated half a point below. Nakamura 6, Caruana 5.5. Radjabov 5, Duda and Rapport with 4.5. Finally, Firouzja has 4. Okay, for this round, you've got to tell me, what do you think about Firouzja's decision to play bullet up until 5:45 a.m.? If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe.